All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to today's session. So, today we're going to be talking about responsive design. We're going to, we have worked on designing websites, we have worked on designing for desktop and for mobile, right? Okay, there's also tablets, right? So, but we're trying to see the connection between both. We have used mobile frames, we have used desktop frames, right? So sometimes there's some designs such as websites, right, that you have on Google, a website that you're looking at on your desktop. It's possible for you to see that same website on your mobile phone, right? But it's not always the same. That's the concept. That's where the concept of responsive design comes in. It simply means our design responding to the frame size or to the frame that we're working with the device, the digital device that we are working with at the moment, right? So now, responsive design is simply the practice of making digital products adapt to different sizes, different screen sizes, and devices. It simply ensures that whether a user is on a phone, a tablet, or desktop, the interface looks good and works seamlessly. Right? With people accessing apps and websites on multiple devices, responsible design is no longer optional. It's essential for usability, accessibility, and user satisfaction. So, how do we make our design responsive? Last time when we worked on the landing page, we designed a landing page for a desktop with a desktop frame, right? With having a laptop in mind. But it's very possible that somebody might be accessing that same website on their mobile phone, right? So if you leave that constraint to the developers, they would just try to work on just try to make it responsive with some code. But it's still our job as UI designers to ensure that that constraint, the way the design responds, the way it shifts and bends depending on the screen size you're working with, it's still our job to define it, right? So why does responsive design matters? Well, first of all, it improves user experience across devices. So something when you're working with desktop, you see that the font sizes are bigger, the spacing is different, the navigation is different entirely, right? So if a responsive design was not made and you just simply take that screen size, that's designed to a mobile platform or a tablet, right? You see some things get confusing. The interface becomes confusing to the users because that's not what they are used to. The font size you use on your desktop will definitely look too big on your mobile, right? So this is why we have to make it responsive. So second of all, it reduces the need to create multiple designs for different platforms. It supports accessibility by making content readable on all screen sizes. So there's something they call mobile first or desktop first process, right? So there are some applications that when you start designing the application or the website, you start with the mobile version. So now, if you are translating this mobile version to the desktop version with the smaller screen sizes, so you are using smaller fonts, and using smaller spacing, things are more compact, right? If you translate this to your desktop version without um changing some things, it will not support accessibility, right? Content will not be readable. It won't be legible. So these are the different factors we have to look at when making our design responsive. It also helps businesses reach wider audiences. So now, just imagine an application that I don't think there's any application that exists now that you cannot access it from your mobile phone, right? So as far as it's on your desktop, you can access it on your Google desktop, right? You can access it on your mobile phone in Google too. That's a typical example of responsive design. No matter where you are or what you want to use to access that application or that website, you can access it and still get the best user experience. Right. Also, it also boosts search engine optimization since search engines favor mobile friendly designs. And so that is why we usually um try to make our design responsive. I think it's the bare minimum nowadays, right? So anything you're working on, especially when it comes to your desktop design, so things like landing pages, websites, web apps, right? Should ensure that they are mobile responsive. Should ensure that this can translate to the tablet version, it can translate to the mobile version. Right? So if you are creating mobile applications, an application that's like running on Android or iOS, this responsive design might not really matter to you because you're working with one screen sizes. But if you're working for a desktop, a website, web app, things that involves larger screen sizes, you have to ensure that it can also translate to smaller screen sizes, right? So in responsive design, we are usually familiar with the concept of breakpoints, right? So these are simply key screen width ranges where the layout changes. Okay, so I would show this in Figma in a few, but common breakpoints include for mobile, you have less than 480 pixels. Tablet, you have 480 to 600, 768 pixels. And for desktop, you have 769 to 100 and above, rather. So let me just share my Figma. Where I show us what I mean, right? Okay. So now last time we talked about frame, I'm just simply going to click on F, right? So now if you come to our properties panel, you're going to see mobile, you're going to see phone, right? You're going to see tablet, you're going to see desktop, right? So these are the three screen sizes we usually design for, right? Like at the very basic, these are the three screen sizes that we design for usually. The watch and presentation watch some if you're, let's say you're working on a training application or something that involves gymming and exercises, and you know that it's something that people would want to have a watch interface for, right? Or you talk about all this Apple Watch and you're designing for those kind of platforms, you also have to make your design the watch version, right? Because the screen size is very different. It's very, very, very small. So you have to compact, you have to like squeeze, you have to ensure that only the very necessary things are being shown. That's that's another thing about responsive design. We have to ensure that as we are reducing our screen sizes, yeah, sometimes it's not everything that would translate. If let me get a desktop screen. So usually the standard we usually use this desktop that's 1440 pixels times 1024 pixels. That's this one. I'm going to get this one. So I'm going to bring this over here. So this is desktop, right? And I'm going to get the one for tablets, right? So tablets, just going to get, let's say iPad mini 8.3, right? So this is what the tablet usually looks like. And I'm going to get one for mobile. Click on F. That's phone, iPhone 13 mini, right? So these are your three screen sizes. These are your three screen sizes. So you have to ensure that the same design that you're designing for here, with if you can see it's larger, this is longer, this is very small, right? So you have to ensure that it's responsive to the screen you're designing for. So a simple way I can show this, but let me just see. All right. Please signify if you can see my screen. So now this is Behance, right? Behance, the platform I share to us where we get design inspirations, looking for designs to replicate. Also a place you can also pitch yourself. You can create an account and post your designs. People can find you and hire you over there, right? Now this is Behance, right? So now watch this is let's watch how it responds. I'm increasing the screen sizes now. So you can see that the grids, right? Currently it has four grids, one, two, three, four, right? But as I resize this, the screen size adjusts. Okay, so I increase this, right? It adjusts. So just take a look, be looking at the recommended for you, these items over here. So that's simply what it means for a design to be responsive. It means for a website to be. It's a terminology that can be seen across both design and development, right? Because as you are designing the responsiveness, the developer is coding in the responsiveness. So that's just it. Now this is the full screen. Let's say this is the desktop frame, right? This is the full screen size, the desktop frame. Currently having one, two, three, four, five grids. That's five cards. Okay. So instead of when you're so now imagine in your mobile device is smaller. Imagine five cards in your mobile device, five horizontal cards, right? It will be tight, it will be squeezed, there will not be enough information. And imagine them of the same size as this, right? It has to scale, it has to become smaller, it has to adjust to the screen size. So let's say I reduce this, okay? I reduce this to this, let's say, yeah, okay. So now this is how our mobile screen probably looks like, right? So it's currently having two grids. So that's the whole concept of responsiveness when your design adjusts to fit into the frame, the current screen size you're working on. And it's not just adjusting blindly, right? We're going to give it constraints. We're going to define the adjustment beforehand to ensure that however it's adjusting and still giving our users the the experience they require for that application. Right. Right. So now in our desktop, right? So let's define our grid system before we try and design something and create the responsive version. So now, like I've said before in desktop, we need to add the layout guide, right? So usually we use the columns, right? Count of 12. For desktop, we usually use a count of 12. Use let's say my margin of 64. Margin, remember, margin is this space outside here. I defined all this in the last class. Space between your content and the bounding box, right? So I'm going to make my gutter 24, right? So now this is my desktop system with a count of 24, right? So simply like this. Right? So this is simply what that means, right? So for my iPad, All right, now so this is just a simple range that we can just have in mind as our breakpoint range, right? So just for mobile, you have this is the width, right? The range I'm giving is in the width, right? So from 0 pixels to 640 pixels are usually in the range of mobile, like a mobile screen. And from 640 pixels to 1024 pixels is in the range of a tablet screen, right? Then 125 pixels and above is the range of a desktop screen, right? So you can see this desktop we are currently working with is 1440, the tablet is 744, and the mobile is 375. You can see that they all fall within the ranges that I just wrote out and defined, right? So we have given the desktop the grid system. For the iPad, we usually use a grid system of the, the column again. We're going to make the count 8, right? We're going to make the margin 64 or 32, right? I'm going to make the gutter 24, right? So for mobile, we use a count of 4, count of 4. Count of 4, margin can usually be 16 or 24. So depending on how big your screen size is. So this is 375. I'm going to use a margin of 16 pixels. Yeah, so you can use some screens as large as 390, right? 412 or something like that. You can all use the margin of 24 pixels, right? So I'm going to make my gutter 24 also, right? So if this is too large, I can make it 16, right? So this is my desktop system, this is my tablet, and this is my mobile. Right. So now to get a simple design that we're going to translate to its responsive version, let's just simply design hero section of a website, right? So like always, you're going to have the logo. Abigail, stop annotating on the screen, please. So I'm going to okay. So, like I've described before in the architecture of a landing page, you're going to have the logo, you're going to have some button links here. So just this is just a simple sketch. Then let's say our visual is here, right? So we're going to have a visual here. Um, so our visual is here. We're going to have the your title, right? Which is usually big as 64. All right, so I'm going to remove the grid system, right? So this is just, then I'm going to group this. Shift A, going to define the spacing between it to be C24, right? Then I'm going to group it with this. Shift A, define the spacing to be 40, right? Also respecting the our spacing system. Also going to group all these buttons to be a link. That's our navigation. What we work, we're going to group them all together. Shift A. Okay. Then we're going to put our grid system to ensure that this respects the grid. So I'm going to move this down. I'm going to zoom in here. Right. I'm going to group this to Shift A and ensure that it's at the, you can zoom in, zoom in, zoom in, zoom in. Then you can see that it's clearly. So these are visuals. Let me just get a picture to add in here. Let's just for any image. Any image is fine. So this works. I need to get this. So yeah, so this is what uh so this is what design currently looks like, right? So just this is a rough sketch of how your hero section should look like. So now we are trying to make this responsive, meaning that when I click on my desktop and I resize it, right, it would resize according to the size I'm currently on, right? But we can see that it's currently not doing that, right? Let's go back to 1440. That currently was. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do to ensure that we're going to put our grid system again. We're going to click on the navigation. When you're working on design responsive, you have to go in one by one to ensure that everything is responsive. Each frame, each selection is responsive, right? So now we're going to look at this. Is currently in an auto layout, right? So that is currently an auto layout, horizontal auto layout, right? The width of 1312 and a height of 74, right? So the width currently is set to fixed. It is currently set to fixed and the spacing is at auto, right? So it's not resizing with our desktop screen. So now this is not where auto layout comes in. This is where our constraints would come in. Right, so we're going to click on this. We're going to go to our properties panel. We need to see something that is something here. This our position, right? We need to see left and top. Left and top. So this is the our position left and right. That's our x-axis, and our position at the top and bottom, that's our y-axis, right? So from left to right. So we're going to change this and change it to left plus right. Right, so now click on our desktop and we resize this. Can we see what happens, right? Now it's resizing with the frame. Right, so this is 1440. But this other one is not resizing along with it. So we're going to do the same for this, right? So we're going to ensure that this is fixed width. Let's see, left plus right. Does it work? Right. So it's resizing, but it's not really resizing. So there's something we are missing, right? So like I said, you have to go individually. So we're going to come to this. We're going to double click to get to this heading. I'm going to see that our width is currently set to fill container, which is correct, right? So there are three different settings for an element in your frame, right? It can have a fixed width. So I'm giving you a width of 500. I do not want you to surpass this width of 500 or be lower than this width of 500. So your width is fixed, 500, right? So there's also the hog content. So this this means that an element would take take the width of its content. Then you also have the fill container, where the element fills whatever frame or container it's currently at. Right. So let me to show you a simple example. So if I click on hog content, you need to see that our sizing adjusts to its content. That's your heading. There's currently a bigger frame outside it, right? That's its container. But for this particular element, that this particular typography, this text, it's currently set to hog content. So the width is hogging its content. Right? But we want it to fill container because we want it to adjust with the container. We want to set it to fill container. We need to do the same thing for this. It's currently set to fill container, correct? To fill container, the button is going to adjust to the whole to the full, going to enlarge, right? So we want the button to be fixed to it, like we already did before, right? So I'm going to also set this to fill container, right? Then we're going to set this picture, this visuals also to fill container. So this ensures that everything right now is filling its container. Right, so now we're going to also try, we're also now going to try to adjust this and see how it works, right? So we see that this is currently adjusting, but this is not, right? So what we're going to do now is to set going to set the spacing between these items 64, right? So there's a spacing between them. Now we're going to see how it resizes. So this is it's currently set to hug instead of fill container for some reason, right? So you have to ensure that it's set to fill container. Else your elements would not resize as you want it to. So now I'm going to do this, we'll do the same now again. Going to resize this, right? And now, yes, it's resizing properly as it should, right? So now if you remember before, our breakpoint is 1025, 640, and 1025 and 640 rather, right? So that's the breakpoint range. So currently this is set at 1440, right? So now I'm going to just duplicate it and take it to the tablet system for tablets. Right, so that's what I'm going to change. I'll change the weight to 640. Right, so we can see that everything is currently it's very tight, right? Things are tight. Then I'm going to change the grid system. Before I do that, I'm going to change the grid system to 8 for a tablet, right? Because we're working with tablet. Mhm. I'm going to make the weight 640. So we can see that it is not looking good, right? Because solely by adjusting it, solely by moving, just constricting or pushing our items together, it's not looking good, right? So that is what by default your browser would do, right? So but that what will do it. It will simply scale your items. Working with a different screen size, we are simply going to scale it. But responsiveness is more than that, right? So this is where we have to actually go into details and do our own thing. And so now I'm going to simply change the auto layout. So instead of it to be horizontal, now I want my picture to be above and my text and my heading rather to be below. Right, so I'm going to change my auto layout to vertical. Right, going to enlarge this. I want my picture to be above, right? So I'm going to remove, yeah. So I see it's exactly the same design, right? But different setting, different. Let's rename this to tablet. Right? So that is how our responsive design works, right? And also when you're making your design responsive for your tablet and your mobile, your navigation system becomes different, right? Because we don't use the link button or the this normal horizontal navigation that we usually use for desktop now. You're going to put something like a hamburger menu, right? So I'm just going to move this out of the way. So usually hamburger menu you can get it in an icon pack, but you can also design it yourself, right? So I'm just going to so I clicked on Control C to copy it, then I'm just going to click on this and Control Shift R, that's copy to replace, right? Right, so this is what our tablet is currently looking like, right? So most of the time you can also come here and instead of right alignment, right? Because we use right alignment here because we are currently having two different elements on that page, right? So you have the visual, which are the right, and you have the text, your heading and your subheading at the left, right? And left, right? Now, since we do not have conflicting visuals and all that, right? We just have your text. Usually, we tend to use center alignment for this. I'm just going to come here. I'll make this center aligned. Come here, make this center aligned. Yeah, and also your button now. You can also decide to make your button center aligned, right? So I'm going to go to auto layout, right? And align center, right? But best option, we might decide to extend it instead of hugging itself. It's going to fill container, right? So now this seems more intelligent, or it seems more cohesive, right? I'm going to bring this down here so we can all just see it side by side, right? So this is how we brought this from this to this. This is our tablets, right? So now the same thing for mobile. We're going to also take this for mobile. Mobile is 312, 312. 375 further, right? So you can see that it's way smaller, right? It's way smaller. This is where you now start to have to adjust, right? So now I'm going to, before I do that, right, I'm going to first of all get my mobile grid. Remember, our mobile grid is different. Mobile grid is four, a count of four. I'm going to switch it on. A count of four, or a margin of 16, right? And a quarter of 24. So I'm going to ensure that this is respecting that margin. It's respecting my grid system. Same thing with this. Okay, same thing with our button, right? So this is mobile. So now you can see that apart from just, okay, so I'm going to resize this. If I forget, 375. 375. Right, so this is what it currently looks like. Now you see that we would probably have to adjust it. Our picture would be a lot smaller. It wouldn't be as round, so probably 16 pixels instead. Yeah. So now we see that apart from scaling up our items, such as your visuals and all and your spacing, you would also have to scale your typography. Right? So we use 96 pixels, 40 and 40 for our heading and subheading in our desktop, right? But it's not necessary. It shouldn't be that big on your tablet or on your mobile. So you can come here, instead of using 96, we're going to use 72 or 64, 72. So for this, the same thing, you can use 32 instead, right? So also, this is why your design system comes in. When I talked about having different button size, your design system, the button you're using on your mobile, on your desktop would be different from the button you're using on your mobile, right? So your mobile button would most probably be smaller. Right, so I'm going to also come here. Some will be a lot smaller. This will be like 64 or even 48. This should be 16. Remember, this is mobile, right? We know how small our mobile screen is. Now, button size should also be different, right? 24. All right. So, and apart from just scaling our typography, you would also have to scale your spacing, right? Because we do not need as much spacing as we did in our desktop because we have a smaller screen size. This is 64. We can adjust this to 32. So the spacing between this can adjust the spacing to 16, right? Or 8. Add that since we have a padding there. And the spacing here 32, right? So this is what our mobile screen currently looks like. And so we would all be familiar with this process. If you simply compare your LMS and your LMS mobile and your LMS desktop, you're going to see some differences, right? Even in the KodeCamp website, if you access it from your mobile phone and you're accessing it from your desktop, there's some differences. It's the same design, it's the same typography. So it's just responding to your screen size to ensure that at whatever screen size you're using, you're getting the best, right? You're getting the best user experience at that screen size. So this we're also going to adjust some little things in this. I'm going to make this 16, right? I'm going to remove the grid system from here. So this is how our design has scaled, right? From the desktop to the tablet to the mobile. Right now, so now if we come here, we're going to open our grid system and I rescale and I move this out, right? This is how it's currently moving because of the constraints we put on it, right? It's still going to be responsive, it's still going to adjust, right? So remembering that our mobile screen range is from 0 pixels to 640 pixels, right? So as long as we are adjusting from 0 to 640, we're going to adjust like this. So the constraints we put in it, right? So but once it's above 640, we come into the tablet view, which is a bit longer and has a bit more spacing with a bit bigger text, right? So once we now hit that constraint of 1024 pixels, we now get into our desktop screens, which are like this. So yeah, though that is how we create, we simply make our design responsive. So now usually when you're designing for maybe a company or all that, right? So what we usually do or how we usually is we usually just create the mobile responsive because you notice the tablet is usually in the middle of the desktop and the mobile, right? So once this design has been coded for both desktop and mobile, there's a middle range that it can also adjust to or adjust with rather. If you can give all three, fine, right? But as a necessity, your mobile responsive is always required for any desktop application you are creating because we are creating it to be responsive to reach a greater, a larger number of audience, right? So that is it for the responsive design, right? So on also trying to do that, this landing page we designed before. So let's just try and see how we can make this responsive, right? So we stopped here. So if I can just take this, Control C, I'm going to paste it in here. Right, so this is our landing page currently. I will want to make this responsive, right? So first things like we said before, we're going to make it easier for you. We're going to get our mobile frame, right? So get your tablet frame, tablet, so deck your phone rather as mobile iPhone 13 mini. That's the screen size I prefer. So depending on what you would like to use, you can use that. I'm going to set up my grid system. Right, so I already made it a style. So I'm just going to click on mobile grid, right? So it's already there. It's already there for me at the moment, right? It should be four. I need to make my count four. So yeah, this is better. Right. So like we did before, you can simply make all this and in auto put it in an auto layout and make it responsive to the frame that it currently is at, right? So we can do that here by making this is currently fixed to it and it's set to auto, right? So currently it's set to auto, so we are fine. If this was set to like 77 pixels now, so this just means that it's going to be fixed, right? So we can see that our image here is already a bit responsive. And so now I'm just going to make this is currently at auto. I'm going to make the constraint left plus right. So if I click on the landing page, it is resizing already. right? So we forgot so it's a field container in an auto layout shift A. I want to give it its own container so it does not look for trouble. I need to make this field container. Then I'm going to make this 64, right? Okay, this is better. So let's see whether it's here. So yeah, this works. Okay. Now I'm going to make this left plus right. Currently at left plus right. Then now also the same thing for this. You can decide to group it with your visual, which was this, right? Then you group both of them. Right? So, but instead of doing that, let's just start working on the mobile responsive and see what we can do. First of all, we're going to get our logo as always. Control C. Going to paste it in here. Control V. Right. So this was a dark mode design. So I'm just going to get the color we used for our frame, our background color. Control V. Right. Set it to hug content, right? But I just don't. I want it to just hug the logo itself, right? Then for the rest, remember we are not just going to create to put we're going to put a hamburger menu in there. I'm going to copy this one which we created over here. Control C, Control and paste it in here. I'm going to make it white since we're working with a dark mode line. I'm going to group both of them. Shift A, right? Currently center aligned. Then I'm going to make sure it's mapping this currently touching our grid system, right? So for me to easily know that, I just know that my width has to be 343. Remember the last time we did the calculations, if you're working with an iPhone 13 mini frame, a frame of 375, right? So you are expecting a margin of 16 pixels on both sides. So subtract 32 from 375. You should know that every single content on your screen that is touching both ends, right, would have a width of 343 pixels. This is why I usually advise people to just get a frame that you're familiar with, right? So you are familiar with the screen size and all the calculation that is concerned with that concerns it rather. Okay, so now we have gotten our navigation, right? So this is just simply saying that once the person clicks on the hamburger menu, the person can see these other options here, right? So that is what we are trying to imply. In an ideal situation, you would also have to create a screen that shows the content of your hamburger menu because you're not going to leave it to your designer to just your developer to just think of it. It's still your job as a designer to ensure that that is clearly stated. Right, so now you need to get a visual. We need to bring it in here. Right, so it's very big. So I'm going to click on K to scale, like we all know. Need to make this 343 and see what comes up, right? So this is what it looks like. Need to align it in the mid to the middle of the screen. Going to get big. So same thing as before. You also have to scale all this, right? Because currently it's set to the sizes that works with your desktop. So if you have created your design system for this design, you can just simply click on here. It's currently at open sans 16 pixels. Can make it 14 or 12, right? Can make this 12. You can click on all this to resize them, right? Or you can just simply click on your frame, click on K to scale. Let's say you want this to be 100, right? Right. But once about scaling, and once after you're done scaling, still especially for your typography and your spacing, right? You still have to click on each of them to ensure that currently everything is currently at 7.27. We do not work with decimals when designing, right? So you find the nearest, right? So that's 10 pixels. Same thing with this here. So find the nearest, which is 12 pixels, and resize it, or we can make it 14. Do the same thing for this satisfied users. And simply come here. Right, so this is how that is looking. Then we're also going to get our text like before. We need to bring our text in here. I'm also going to resize this. Right, so it's currently at 96. To make it 32. I'm going to make this 16. Right. So we can do the same thing that we did previously for this. Make this center aligned, adjust the spacing, 32. It just involves you resizing, right? So if I remove my layout guide, let's say I want to move my layout guide, I put it in because I want to ensure that this should be 343, like my calculations. So 343. So now this should be set to fill container, like I've said before. We have to ensure that our container currently is set to 343. Right, so these are your so we can decide to group all this, right? So I'm just going to group this, and this, Control G. So that's a group. I'm going to click on this with this and click on Shift A, right? Then I'm going to make my spacing 32, right? So depending on what I choose, I can decide to move my this up or down, right? Now the first thing we can see that is very obvious to us now, right, is how big our button looks. It looks off place, right? It doesn't look looks too big. It is jumping at the user's face, right? Which is not necessary. So we're just going to adjust our button sizes. It's currently at 16 pixels, which is okay, but it's too large at the moment, right? So I'm just going to, if I can reduce our padding to 8, 8 would be too small. Make it 10. I want to work with this now. So 10 and 20. My spacing is 24 pixels, right? So sometimes for buttons, if you want to have a more cohesive look, what you can do is to ensure that the width of your button is constant, regardless of the content inside it. So now if you look at these two buttons, you can see that your download app is a bit elongated, it's longer and it's taking a lot more space and importance than the start now button, even though the start now button is more important, right? By virtue of its weight, it's like it's getting a lot more attention. This is 343. Right, so what we can do now is to ensure, so our width of this download app is currently at 157. We can make this 157 too, right? So this is 24. See if 16 works, right? Now we have to, so now this is what this is what we have, right? Can still decide, so I want this down. I think this would be better, right? So this is what it's looking like. So this is same application, but just different screen size, right? So let's get there's a little background here. It's an ellipse here, right? I'm going to copy this, Control C. It is a ellipse that makes this a bit brighter. Let's click on Control V. And so the ellipse, we're also going to resize it. You can just simply put it in the middle here. And so now this is your collaboration with, you're going to click on the Control C. Going to elongate this. On Control V. Right? So now it's currently here. But now I'm going to set, okay, I'm going to click on this second setting. Currently the auto layout is at horizontal, right? So you can see that our elements are horizontally aligned. I want it to be vertical, meaning straight lines. I'm going to change the auto layout to vertical. Right, so this is what it looks like. Just going to resize this frame. Going to resize it and change it to 343, which is our calculated width. And I'm going to put it in the middle alignment, right? So it's currently set to left alignment. I want it to be in the center. I'm going to do the same thing, right, as we did before. But before I do that, I'm just going to increase my spacing to, let's say, 128, right? So it's a lot more spaced. That is too much. I'm going to set it to fill container. I'm going to make it middle. So now it's currently at the middle. I'm going to put this collaboration with it's the middle, same thing here. I'm going to reduce the size to 16, right? So now we're going to see that there's probably now a need for you to, so now you can now include like a line and underline over here, right? To show that this collaboration with is a small subtitle, right? You can also decide to adjust your logo sizes, right? Because these are the sizes that worked for the desktop. They might be too big for your mobile. So I'm going to click on all this. So just try to scale 32. Let's work with 40. So ensuring that this is in the middle. Remember, before you anytime you're resizing, click on lock aspect ratio, right? So if you want to resize from both sides, ensure that you lock the aspect ratio before you resize. Yes, I'm just going to reduce this small, say 36, because a bit bigger. So now as I've reduced it, so now I can try my 64 pixels again. Might still be a bit too much, and I can just adjust, right? Once I find what works. So let's say I want to go with 80 pixels. 80 pixels. So yeah, you can work with this, right? So you can also decide if you don't want to go with this format, Control D. You can also work with a scrollable version, right? So scrollable like before, going to have this, but what you're just going to do instead is just going to resize like always. So I'm going to adjust the spacing between those 32. So I'm locking it so it doesn't affect my design. We're locking this ellipse at the back, right? So I have this, I'm going to check my spacing, 48.747, right? Mm, yeah, so 80 pixels might be too much. We can work with 48 here, right? Since it's scrollable. So now you can also do this, right? So this is simply following the version that is used here. Just simple. But sometimes this is the most common one you see. So collaboration with just simply scroll up and you see all the companies they are collaborating with at the moment, right? So the same thing with this. Here you're just going to right. So now in this, so the first thing you're going to change here is probably the auto layout. So we make it vertical, right? Then I'm going to set the width, the frame again to 343. Right, so that's the frame you're working with. Already adjusted. Once you put it in the middle, so, so you can also do the same thing we did for this one. Align them all to the middle, right? Then you can now start adjusting some things like your elements we put in here, right? So this is how it's looking very different for your mobile. Okay, Patrick asked, I thought every number should follow the 8-point system, or can we just use any random number that suits the design? No, you cannot, right? Your numbers should always follow the 8-point system. should always follow the 8 point system, right? Especially for when it comes to things like your the typography and your element. But for things like let's say your image size, right? It's not necessary for you to follow the typography, the 8 point system. Let's say or the let's say my circle. It's not necessary for you to follow something like this, right? Let's see if I go in here. Sorry about that, not that. Okay, for something like this circle is currently set to 18. Make this 18, right? So it's not necessary for this for elements like this to follow the 8 point system, right? Your gap spacing should always follow your 8 point system, Patrick. It should always. So let's see. So currently if you can see here, my spacing in here is 40 divisible by 8. It's 80 divisible by 8. Right? This is also 80 divisible by 8, right? So this is 96 also divisible by 8, right? You can also adjust to 72 divisible by 8, right? So that and so forth and so forth. So is there any place I used a spacing that was not divisible by 8, right? So sometimes if 8 pixels is too maybe they don't want to work it is too much, like this is too limiting. You can work with a four pixel spacing, right? The 4 pixel spacing would let you use 20, 24, 28, right? But an 8 pixel spacing would not let you use 20. So let's use 24 and 32, but it won't let you use 20 and 28, right? So it just depends on the spacing system you're using. But both of them works fine for whatever you're working on. So let's see here that let me lock this. It's conflicting with my design. So I just went here to lock it. You can also do that easily, right? So the spacing in here is 16, also divisible by 8, right? 32, also divisible by 8. So things like your spacing should always, like it should always follow your point system. The typography should also always, right? Should always follow your point system. And so on and so forth. But things for things like your elements, right? You see your visuals or a shape or a box that you put somewhere, it's not necessary for you to follow the 8 point system, right? Because it's not really a part of the the spacing system, if that makes sense. Right. So yeah, you can also do the same thing for this. So if you want to make this responsive, we will also work like how we did it the hero section, right? So that would be by having either these visuals at the bottom or at the top and center aligning this text here. Right. So for this, we can also set it to fill. Let's see how it works with fill container. Let me see, and to fill container. So just depends on your design system and all, right? So yeah, so are there any questions? Are there any questions? Any confusions and any any question we want to ask, right? So any question, anything we want to ask before we round up the class of today? All right. So before we round up the class, All right, I apologize for that. All right, so let's continue. So I was asking if we have questions or things, anything we are confused about, right? So just raise up your hand if you have any question. If you can see my screen and hear me clearly, just drop an emoji in the chat section. All right, thank you, Ezekiel. So yeah, so for the making, okay, so Patrick asks, in what case do we use the hog content and other options? Right, so it simply depends on, like I said, right? So like in this situation, like in this button, in this situation. Now, when we are using that setting that we're using is relative to the content of that element, right? So if you look at this grouping, 1, 2, 3, this is the container. We can see the bounding box. This is the container, right? This is the container. So depending on how we want our elements to move relative to our container, we decide on which of them we are using. So these are containers, inside containers, inside containers. That's the whole concept of auto layout. Even this container we can see now is inside another container, which is this one, right? So click on this, we see this, we see another container. Click on this, we see another container. Click on this, we see its own container. And click on the button, we see the button's container itself. So these are frames or containers rather, right? So for the button now, I do not want my, if I click on fill container, my button resizes to fill the container, but I do not want that, right? I want my button to retain the size and the padding and the padding that I gave it already from the design system or from wherever I set it to be. So I'm going to click it to hug content. And it's hugging this content, right? It's hugging my content. It's not simply just hugging the button, like this button text here. It's hugging my content relative to the settings I have put in it. Because I have already identified, I've already set that my padding is going to be 8 pixels top and bottom and 16 pixels left and right. So it's going to hug the contents of its hug the content relative to the padding I have set it. I have already set, if that makes sense. So that's where we use hug content. You also have a fill container, then you have the fixed hug content. So now fixed, which is when I do not want it to hug my container. I don't want it to hug its content, but I have a fixed width I want to give it. For example, maybe I want it to be 200. I'm just going to click on here and click right, type 200 pixels. So now it's going to be 200 pixels. It's going to be 200 pixels while still having that padding of 8 and that padding of 16. But by virtue of the fixed width, it has to adjust to ensure that its width is currently 200 pixels. Control Z. So the same thing, it's also the same thing we did here when we were making this our design mobile responsive. You notice as soon as I bring an element in here, I make the width 343 pixels. So this is currently at set to fixed width. Means that once I'm the one that once I type in the width myself, once I am the one that I click on that width section and type in something from my keyboard, I'm setting it to a fixed width. It's fixed because I typed it in there, right? But once I set it to hug its content, it's currently set to hug. Once I tell it to fill the container, it's set to fill container. These are the different options you can set in your auto layout. So I have a question, please. How did you resize the elements in the screen? So I resized it by clicking on K. I think that's the keyboard shortcut you're looking for. K means to scale, right? K. Or if you don't want to use that, you can use lock the aspect ratio, right? So that's simply, let's say I bring in this my my visual, I bring it in here, right? So this is my visual at the moment. I click on K. So click K, it will give you setting to scale this element I'm currently selecting, right? So now the width of my home screen, remember we have already gotten our width of 343 pixels. Just going to change it to 343 pixels, right? So it's just going to scale it and resize it according to that width. So that's how I scaled my element. Right. So Ezekiel asks, with the feature of desktop mode on some mobile phone browsers, do we design with this feature in mind, or do we just assume that the browser will imitate the desktop specifications for the mobile design? Right. So when the feature of desktop mode is simply desktop, right? So once you click on desktop mode in your mobile screen, what you're going to see on your mobile screen is exactly what you will see on your desktop screen. That's basically what it means, right? But if you notice, the desktop mode it's not what a person, somebody would usually go for, opt for. It's usually in some very dense applications. Let me just tell you, if someone using your application has to click on desktop mode, it means that there's a problem with that application's usability, right? Because there's probably a problem with the mobile version of that application. So they decided to opt for the desktop mode, if that makes sense, Ezekiel. Okay. So Ezekiel, does that answer your question? Said, do we design with this feature in mind, or do we just assume that the browser will imitate? Okay, let me listen to you. I'm listening to you.
No, no, I was going to say yes,
You want
it
to,
did
you cannot
because
mute your
I
mic.
felt like I've been on some websites where the mobile how do I put it, the mobile view didn't really capture all the features. Like I had
Yeah,
to either
exactly.
rotate my screen or I had to change it to desktop mode before I could see like some features I wanted to click on. That was why I was asking
Exactly.
if you are designing for mobile, you have to like put that feature in mind. But thank you very much. You answered it already. Thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Right. So if Faith asks, how did I do everything? How did I do that? Everything the screen was adjusting at the same time. I think you're referring to this, right? So I simply did this by setting constraints in my application. I set constraints using auto layout. Oh, I'm still in controls. Let me leave my skill. So if I simply resize this, I think this is what you meant, right? So how I did this is to ensure that my elements were set correctly. I first of all put everything in auto layout, right? So in Figma we have different versions to help us do what we're supposed to do. There are different tools, there are different features that helps us do what we're going to do. So scaling helps us Shift A or the auto layout helps us to scale our items, ensures that our items as our elements are set, they have a fixed layout. Remember, I told you that auto layout is like grouping, but it's more intelligent, right? So remember when we put a spacing of 30 pixels between two different elements, no matter how you resize it and move it around, that 30 pixels will remain the same. That's what auto layout helps us to do. So now, if you can see now in this my logo and type, right? My logo, this my navigation. The auto layout is currently set to horizontal. If I make it vertical, it's just going to resize like that, right? It's going to resize like that. You can see it became vertical. Logo, type, and link is here. So it's not really showing very well, but it resets like that, right? So I'm going to put all my elements. I'm going to group my elements in an auto layout first, right? I'm going to ensure that my constraint is set to left and right. Remember that we are resizing like this. Okay. If you notice, now we're resizing left and right. Left and right. This is how I'm resizing. I'm not resizing. If I resize top and bottom, it's not adjusting the same way because I did not set my constraints to top and bottom, if that makes sense, right? So let me say so let me try and set my constraints to top and bottom. Let's see what works. Top plus bottom, right? So now I resize this. So it's currently resizing like that, but it's not very intelligent, most probably because of the padding of the system. Right, so let me do this to top and bottom and see what works. Right, so we can see that it starts moving. So you probably still have to adjust this link up here and ensure that everything is spaced correctly. So you can also select these two and click on Shift A for both of them. So that's simply how we did it. We set constraints to our element. We set constraints to our element to ensure that it is currently resizing left and right and currently resizing top and bottom. Right? So Faith, do you understand what that means? Are you clear on that question? All right. So first of all, there are just two things you're supposed to do. Ensure that your element is in an auto layout, right? Because this is something that we're trying to resize. We're trying to resize things and want to ensure that as you're resizing it, it's not going to be scattered. So auto layout is a grouping. They have grouped different things together. I want to ensure that it sticks to that grouping. So first of all, put it in an auto layout. Then to give it a command or a constraint on how it's going to resize, we're going to go to our position and click on either left plus right or top plus bottom. Right. So that's for so there's no other questions. I wanted to show us something, right? So I defined a grid system for desktop. I defined a grid system for tablet and a grid system for mobile. But there's another grid system that we have not really looked at. I don't know if you have enough time to do that. But I'll just show us quickly. I'm going to click on frame. I'm going to click on. I'm going to. No, I'm going to click on F, right? Then select a desktop. I'm going to select the desktop frame. I'm going to bring this in here. Right, so now if you notice, if you are familiar with a dashboard, right? Familiar with a dashboard. Dashboard is like a desktop. It's not a website. It's not a web application, but it's kind of a compact screen where you see a lot of details. So your LMS desktop screen, your LMS screen is an example of a dashboard, right? We also looked at dashboard when we went to Behance and we searched for different dashboards in our last class. I don't know if you remember, right? But a dashboard typically uses a different different grid system than a normal desktop. Right? So normally in desktop we tend to use if I go to my layout guide, click on plus, I change this to columns. So my count will usually be 12. My margin might be 100 or 64. And my gutter is probably 24, right? So this is how a typical desktop grid system looks like, right? But now considering that we're creating a dashboard, right? So usually a dashboard has a side panel. That's how we have usually has a side panel that is expandable and expandable, right? So let me see if I can show us because I want us to have the mental like to understand what I'm talking about. Right, so this is so I'm currently in Behance. Right, so this is a dashboard. You can see how it looks like, right? So this is the sidebar. You see things like the balance, installment, investment, property balance, wallet balance, name balance, transaction, invoice sent, your navigation, your search. But you can see that it's a very information dense screen. There's a lot of things on that screen, right? And your normal grid system would not work for this. Why? Because first of all, inside there's a sidebar menu here, which already disrupts your normal flow. There's usually a sidebar, there's a spacing here, there's another spacing here. So it's going to disrupt your normal flow. So we have to account for this sidebar when creating our dashboard, right? So I'll just simply give us the formula we use for the dashboard system. Then then we would say goodbye, right? So usually in dashboard system, let's say you have your like I'm going to draw my rectangle. I've gotten a spacing for my sidebar, right? So this is my sidebar. I want this to be my sidebar, right? Okay. So what I'm going to do now, that instead of having, I'm going to go to my layout guide. I'm going to go to my count. My count is still 12, but my type will no longer be stretched. My type will now be left. Okay. I'm going to make it left. And I'm going to set my offset. I'm going to, I'm going to set my offset, right? I'm going to set my offset such that it starts from where my sidebar stops. I don't know if that makes sense. So instead of stretch like we normally use, it's currently at offset, right? So 290. So usually you should also size. Let me make it 288. 288, right? I need to increase my width. Now I'm going to increase my width so that it extends throughout the layout of this screen, right? So usually I'm going to get a rectangle and I'm going to put a small rectangle here, make it red. Remember our spacing system that I talked about? I'm going to probably make this depending on what I want my margin to be. So let's say I want my margin to be 42 or to 32, right? I'm going to make this 32, 32. I'm going to move this here. I'm going to make it red, right? Remember our red, also going to duplicate it and bring it in here. So I'm going to make this darker so we can differentiate it from our background. So now that's my side panel, right? Now I'm going to also adjust my column now so that it respects that. I'm going to increase my offset again. But it starts where my spacing stops. I'm going to ensure that it starts where this stops, right? You can see it clearly. So this means that there is currently a spacing of 32 pixels between my side panel and my content. So same thing for here. I'm going to just reduce my width so that it laps to, so that the spacing is set correctly. So my width is going to be 69. So I'm going to just resize this. So once you click on your width, you're going to see like a scale button. I can just simply resize, right? And resize it easily. I'm going to make this 66, 68. And you can also increase it. 70, 69. Right? Yeah, let's say 69. Let's work with 69, right? So you probably have to do better calculations, right, to get this properly. But this is typically how it would look like. This is how your grid system for a dashboard will look like. I just put this out there because you're going to also encounter dashboards in the future. So you're not confused and you start using this grid system because this grid system would most likely not work well for you. Right. So this is the grid system we use for a dashboard. So so sometimes you might have a smaller sidebar. So your sidebar can be smaller like this. So you need to get your spacing and put it in here. Then you're going to also reduce your offset. Same thing as we did before. Reduce your offset so it adjusts to that. And so when you now reduce your offset, you're also going to increase your width. Right? Right. So that is all for today. And so we're slowly coming to the end of the boot camp. So are there any questions, any other confusions concerning responsive design or anything at all that we have done today? Right, so I'm going to also share the link to this Figma file, right? So there are some things, probably some numbers that we have done here that you want to probably look at again, or the grid system we used and all that. I'm going to share the Figma file link. This is linked to everything we have done so far, so you can review it in your free time, right? So yeah, so that's all for today's session. I'll see you all on Thursday. Have a nice week and good luck with your learning. Right. So good night, everybody, and